In today's video, I'm going to be answering some of your questions. So over on Instagram, I asked what some of the questions are that you have about what it's like to be a PhD student. I have just jotted down a few of those here. Several of them sort of fell into the same categories. Let's jump into it. So the first question is how to deal with that time between when you interview and then when you are accepted or rejected from a program. So I completely understand how challenging that waiting period can be. If you're anything like me, maybe you applied to PhD programs in other parts of the country, and so you're sitting there wondering, am I going to have to move across the country or not? And in my case, the answer was ultimately yes. That's a very stressful time, but it's also sort of this very special time. You have just invested several months of your life into this PhD application process. Maybe that entailed taking the GRE. It definitely entailed submitting statements of purpose, getting letters of recommendation from people. There are so many components to it, and then you go through the interview process, and after that you are left waiting and wondering. But that time is also so special. You're getting ready to essentially launch into the next phase of your life, whether or not you end up going into a PhD program, right? No matter what, this experience has been sort of a tremendous transformative learning opportunity. Do your best to enjoy that time. You aren't locked down or committed to anything yet, and there's definitely an element, I think, of freedom and excitement in that opportunity. You're finally past the challenges of the application process, and so it's a great time to sort of help support your body and mind and relieving some of that stress that you may have developed over those months of applying. Get in touch with friends and family. Go see people that you might not have the opportunity to see very much once you are eventually in your program. I understand it's so difficult to sort of endure that waiting period, but it's also a very special time where you can take time for yourself, take time for your friends and family, and just enjoy that waiting game before you have to launch into the next big thing. The next two questions are very closely related to each other. The first one being, is it possible to hold a full-time job during your PhD? And the second one being, what's the timetable like for a PhD? Is it a Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 sort of gig? So this answer might not be totally satisfying, but I will say that it depends on your unique experience, your program, your PhD. I can only speak to my experience, and here is what that is. So for me, I definitely view my PhD as a full-time job. So in addition to conducting research for my own dissertation, my own master's and so forth, I also do research through my research assistantship, which is how I am funded. In past semesters, I have worked as a teaching assistant and gained funding that way. Now, when I say gain funding here, I'm referring to my living stipend. So that's how I make a living wage and I'm able to support myself. If you are applying to a program and they are not able to provide you with some sort of living stipend, that could potentially be a component you should take into consideration when you're deciding whether or not that program is the right fit for you. Personally, I think it would be very challenging to have to work a full-time job while pursuing my full PhD. Now, I definitely know that there are cases of individuals who maybe are toward the latter portion of their PhD, such as those who are quote-unquote all but dissertation or ABD, who may just be wrapping up kind of their final dissertation process and who'd go ahead and get a full-time job during that time. I'm sure it has its own challenges. Even when everything goes as planned, it still always seems to take much longer than anticipated. And so I think that when you're considering whether or not you could hold a full-time job at the same time, that's going to play a large role in how long it ultimately takes you to complete your degree. Which leads us into the next question, which is how do you balance all the responsibilities that you have as a PhD student? So I've spoken about doing my own research for my dissertation. I've spoken about being a research assistant or RA and a teaching assistant or TA. Something that I haven't touched on yet is that you also take classes, and point blank, it's challenging to balance all of those responsibilities. It has been such a humbling and growing experience, constantly developing sort of new strategies to help me manage it better. I do it better sometimes than others. There are times when my house looks better than others. There are times when I look better than others. And ultimately, there are times when I feel better than others. And so I think that, again, it is just a journey with many ups and downs. Over time, I've learned how to schedule and sort of compartmentalize things more effectively. So, for instance, one strategy is define what helps you work best. Is it best for you to have multiple meetings blocked in one day, or is it best for you to sort of scatter your meetings throughout your week? That might also be something that changes for you semester to semester. So maybe you find that in the spring you like blocked, but in the fall you like them scattered. Find what works for you. That's something that has been really helpful for me, is to sort of identify the approaches that work best. That can help you to develop more balance in your day-to-day life. And I think that this clearly ties into the next question, which is how do you develop skills throughout your PhD? And I really think that the key here is framing. So it can be so easy to get caught up with all these responsibilities of the PhD and all of the challenges that come with day-to-day life, and you sort of forget how far you have come and how much you have achieved, not only achieved on paper, but also within yourself as an individual, a learner, and even a leader. I think it can be useful sort of at least once a semester to kind of sit down and reflect on that a little bit. And the more that you do this, the more easy it will become and the more natural it will feel. So reflect on how you've grown as a leader. Have you led teams of undergraduate students within your lab? Have you had the opportunity to teach or lecture in a classroom setting? So not only here are you developing leadership skills, you're developing public speaking skills, organization skills, and so forth. All of those things are very tangible and very valuable points on an application to any sort of position, whether within or outside of academia in the future. Improving my communication skills not only helps me in my job, but it also helps me in my personal relationships. These are just a few really brief examples, but the point here is to take time to reflect on how much you have grown throughout your PhD, because even though in the moment it might seem like you only know a lot about this one specific area of research, you've probably gained more skills than you think, and you just need a moment to reflect upon that for them to sort of come to light. And then the last question that I will cover in today's video is, what makes a PhD so hard? Everyone talks about how difficult it is, but why is it so difficult? And I think that this is a fantastic question and definitely not one that is so easy to answer. It's really difficult to sort of balance all of the responsibilities and all of the different roles that you have to play as a PhD student. So not only are you a researcher who is trying to develop novel research in an area, but you're also a mentee, right? So you typically will have some sort of advisor or primary investigator or a PI above you. So you have sort of a boss, but also someone who you should be able to turn to, maybe for some sort of advice on the research that you are developing. So it definitely takes some time to sort of master that skill of how to be a responsive and productive mentee. You also are a mentor, whether that be to undergraduates within your lab or to students within the classroom setting. People look up to you as a leader in whatever they are doing. So it takes time to kind of come into yourself as a leader and figure out what type of leader that you are. You also experience a lot of criticism. So not only from yourself, if you are a perfectionist or sort of hard on yourself when things don't go as planned, but you naturally receive criticism from advisors, from collaborators, and from reviewers when you submit research for publication, right? So there's a lot of criticism that can go into that, and the intention is never to explicitly hurt your feelings, or at least I would hope that it isn't. But still, it can be challenging to face and to learn how to respond to that criticism in a productive way. And when I say respond, I don't just mean what can you say back to it, because sometimes you don't really need to say anything at all. But I mean, how can you sort of decide which criticism is actually going to be productive and something that you maybe should reflect upon and make changes according to, and then which can you kind of let go of. So here I'm sort of really getting at one of the biggest challenges can also be kind of these interpersonal hurdles that we have to overcome. It's also the fact that not many people pursue a PhD, and so it can be challenging to relate to others outside of maybe your cohort or your classmates because it is such a sort of unique experience, and it can be challenging to not be able to speak to your friends or family about it because it might be difficult for them to relate to it. It's just really important to make sure that we have those healthy outlets, we have healthy ways that we can check out from kind of the day-to-day challenges. And it's also wonderful to have a healthy support system around you. Despite all of the challenges that one can encounter during a PhD, I definitely have no regrets about pursuing this path. I think that for the purpose of what I am trying to achieve, both professionally and personally in my life, it made sense for me. It may or may not make sense for you. And so advice that I would give to someone who is interested, try to connect with others who are in that position currently, see what they are interested in pursuing goal-wise, and if your goals are similar. Does it make sense for you to pursue a PhD in order to achieve that ultimate goal? Trying to pursue one just to have the letters behind your name, I don't think is enough motivation to really sustain you throughout the entire process, but ultimately that's for you to decide. I hope you found this video helpful. Comment down below and let me know what else you would like to see from me. And as always, thank you for being here.